In this tutorial, we're going to look at what culture is and begin to define that. We're going to begin by defining a few terms and considering some of the key processes and concepts embodied by the word culture. Before we look at any culture in particular, it's helpful to understand what culture is in general and how it works. We're going to focus on the relationships between the invisible aspects of culture and the underlying values and assumptions of a society and culture that can be seen, the specific behaviors that derive from those values. In other words, how does what people think affect how they act? It's important to understand that what people do and say in a particular culture is not just arbitrary and spontaneous, but it is consistent with what the people believe in that culture and what they value. By knowing people's values and beliefs, you can come to expect and predict their behavior. Once people are no longer catching you off guard with their actions, and once you are no longer simply reacting to their behavior, you're well on your way to successful cultural adjustment. Once you accept that people behave the way they do for a reason, whatever you may think of that reason, you can go beyond simply reacting to that behavior and figure out how to work with it. Knowing where behavior is coming from doesn't mean that you have to like it or accept it, but it should mean that you're no longer surprised by it and that that's a big step towards successful interaction. Imagine that you've been invited to a meal in your neighbor's home. You would probably feel confident that you know how to behave politely in that particular situation. Your mother probably taught you as a child what was expected of you, and your behavior has been refined since then by many experiences of dining with others. You know to do things like greeting your host politely, asking where you should sit at the dining table, holding your fork and knife correctly, etc. You probably don't even think about those kinds of things anymore. But what if your neighbors had recently come from another country, like Senegal? There are many different points of etiquette that a Senegalese person knows constitute polite behavior that you might not know. These are the things that their parents would have taught them or that they had modeled for them, and they don't even think about them anymore. For example, in a Senegalese visiting and dining situation, you should begin by greeting the family and taking time to ask about health and the welfare of the family members. You should wait to be shown your seat and not just sit wherever you want, because seating is often a matter of hierarchy. The meal might be served on the floor or on a low table, so you should sit cross-legged, trying not to let your feet touch the food mat. You shouldn't start to eat until the oldest male starts to eat. Food is often served with a communal bowl, and you should eat with the section of the bowl in front of you, and you would never reach across the bowl to get something from the other side. And eat only with your right hand. Your hosts will urge you to take second helpings, and you should always sample each dish that is offered, leaving a little food on your plate and in your section of the communal bowl, because this shows that you have enough to eat and that your hosts have looked after you well. And people usually stay for at least half an hour after eating to talk and show that the personal relationship with your hosts is important to you. So even though you might very much want to be polite and show respect to your neighbors, there is a real risk of acting in a way that might seem to them to be very impolite and possibly even annoying or offensive. If you don't know what is polite and respectful, you can't communicate that to your neighbors, even with the best of intentions. That people from two different cultures can view the same behavior differently is precisely what makes cross-cultural encounters so challenging and problematic. Culture has been compared to an iceberg. Part of the iceberg is visible, above the waterline, but there is a larger, invisible section below the waterline. Culture has some aspects that are observable. These are the things that people do and say. It's their behavior. But there are other aspects of culture that can only be suspected, imagined, or worked out by instinct. So like an iceberg, the part of culture that we can observe is only a small part of a much bigger whole. The aspects of culture that might be described as being below the waterline are things that have to do with values, beliefs, thoughts, and opinions. Here is a list of some common features of culture. Think through how you would divide into two sections the things that you consider to be above the waterline, the observable behavior, and those things that are not observable. Facial expressions, religious beliefs, religious rituals, the importance of time, paintings, values, literature, child raising, what leadership means, gestures, festivals and holidays, the concept of justice, what friendship means, what is modest or immodest, maybe popular foods, common eating habits, education standards of understanding of the natural world, the concept of self, the accepted work ethic, what is beautiful, music, types of dress, general worldview, the view of personal space, and the rules of social etiquette. And at this time, you can pause the video and take some time to consider how you would divide these into the two categories. You might notice that there is a relationship between observable behavior, things that appear above the waterline, and those things that are not observable. In most cases, the invisible aspects of culture influence or cause the visible ones. For example, religious beliefs often motivate the form of festivals, holidays, or rituals. Rules of social etiquette influence common eating habits and child-raising beliefs, or accepting work ethic, or the influence of education. If your desire is to learn to communicate clearly, cross-culturally, it is important to take the necessary time to learn to understand those deeper, hidden things that are below the surface of observable behavior. We saw how some aspects of culture show up in people's behavior, and that many other aspects of culture are invisible, such as thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. We saw that these two areas, the visible and the hidden, are actually related to each other, and that the values and the beliefs that can't be seen are what influence behavior. If you want to understand where behavior comes from, to understand why people behave the way they do, then you will have to learn about the values and the beliefs. The behavior of people from another culture may seem strange to you, but it probably makes a lot of sense to them, and vice versa. Our behavior makes sense to us because it is consistent with what we believe or what we think is worthwhile. When we say that what someone has done makes no sense, what we mean is that their action contradicts what we believe that person really feels or wants. In the table here, we have listed a certain behavior and then described a value or belief that might have motivated that behavior. After you have read through this list once, read through it again and think of other specific behaviors that might be prompted by each of the values or beliefs listed. Here we can see the behavior at a meeting, agreeing with a suggestion you actually think is wrong. The value or belief is maybe saving face. Not helping the person next to you on an exam would be self-reliance. Taking a day off of school to attend the wedding of a cousin could be centrality of family. Keeping an older member of staff whose performance is weak may be respect for age. Asking a question to bring out your opinion rather than disagreeing openly could be indirectness. Also, asking the boss for his opinion about something that you're an expert in could be deference to authority. Inviting the cleaning staff to eat lunch with everyone else in the office could be egalitarianism. Asking people to call you by your first name could be informality. Disagreeing openly with someone at a meeting, directness, or accepting without question that something can't be changed would be external control. All of us have preferences, thoughts about things and certain ways of doing things. Some of these are universal to all people, some are dictated by our culture, and some are just our own personal preferences. So we can say that culture is only one dimension of human behavior. To understand what culture is, it's important to see it in relation to the other two dimensions, the universal and the personal. Let's define them and look at some examples. Universal refers to the ways in which all people in all groups are the same. So some examples of that would be being careful when crossing the road, sleeping regularly, regretting being the cause of an injury to another person, feeling sad at the death of a mother or a father, or getting food and preparing it. Cultural refers to what a particular group of people have in common with each other and how they are different from every other group. Some examples of that would be considering snakes to be sacred, waiting in a queue, respecting older people, eating with chopsticks, being welcoming to strangers, pointing with the bottom lip, or smearing ashes on your face in respect of a death. Personal describes the ways in which each one of us is different from everyone else, including those in our own group. So we see here that sleeping with the window open, liking spicy food, preferring playing soccer to reading a book, or not liking large social gatherings. There are two important things for you to remember. First, because of universal behavior, not everything about people in a new culture is going to be different. Some of what you already know about human behavior is going to apply in another culture. And two, because of personal behavior, not everything you learn about another culture is going to apply in equal measure or at all to every individual in that culture. For example, I lived with my family for many years in a small, isolated village in Guinea, West Africa. We lived among the people and learned their language and their culture. One of the differences in culture we recognized almost immediately was in the area of privacy. As Westerners, we highly valued privacy in our family and personal life. Even considering that we had a personal life was evidence of our view of privacy. Although we enjoyed spending a lot of time with the local people, we liked to choose when that time would be. We also liked, or maybe even needed, some time when we were just on our own. Most of our friends in the village did not consider personal privacy in many areas of life to be something to be valued or sought after. Many had not even thought much about it before. However, one local family saw how we lived and noticed that we valued times when we were alone as a family. They expressed empathy for our feelings about privacy and said that they also like to have some time alone as a family. And that always being with other people was stressful to them. They said they liked to keep the inside of their home as a private place, and that they didn't enjoy people just walking in unannounced. This was a surprise to us as a family because we assumed that everyone in the village thought about privacy in the same way. In time, as we became closer to the people and got to know them on a deeper level, we identified many areas of culture, common behaviors and beliefs that most people in the group shared. But we also noticed many cases of personal preference as well. Even in that isolated, more homogeneous cultural situation, there were other cases of people who did not always follow the cultural norms.